Hey, so everyone, welcome to our program today. This is the Science of Life Club. My name is Krishna, and our VP is Yater. We appreciate you taking the time to come out to listen to our respected faculty members discuss the complementarity of science, philosophy, and religion today. We're going to start with having our professors give some opening statements about their perspective on what the complementarity of science, philosophy, and religion is. And then that'll be about an hour. And then we're going to move into the discussion among them. And then we'll have an audience Q&A at the end. Depending on how many questions there are, that'll depend on how much time we give to that. So if questions arise, feel free to write them down or tell Yater or I on the side here, so we know how much time to give to the Q&A at the end. All right. And I just want to thank again Professor Richard Trama, Professor Philip Eaton, and Professor Jongbok Yi for coming today. We're waiting on Professor Marcello Spinella. I'm not sure if something came up, but we hope he'll be here in the near future. But yeah, fingers crossed. Otherwise, we'll start with Professor Trama to give the opening statements. We'll go to Professor Eaton and then Yi. All right, thank you very much. And you're welcome to, by the way, if you like, you're welcome to sit over here. We have some special nameplates for you if you're comfortable. I mean, where's Mark? Sorry, I forgot one of the most important parts at the beginning. Yater is going to give an introduction to the program today, read a little bit, a description of what we're doing here, what the topic is about. And
without further ado, today's educational system prioritizes specialization, often driven by financial incentives and career prospects. While specialization has led to remarkable advancements in individual fields, it has also fostered an academic and social culture of isolation, where discipline operates in silos with limited cross-disciplinary dialogue. This mechanistic approach risks fragmenting our understanding of knowledge, making it difficult to appreciate the deep interconnections between science, philosophy, religion, and the arts. A more integrative model of education, one that fosters collaboration across disciplines, can help students develop a holistic worldview that better reflects the complexity of human experience and the challenges of our time. Philosophy and religion provide conceptual frameworks that can help understand scientific data in ways that transcend purely mechanistic explanations, offering deeper ontological and metaphysical insights. These frameworks can inspire new scientific questions and directions of inquiry, encouraging a more holistic understanding of reality. At the same time, the rigor of a scientific approach ensures that philosophical inquiry and religious thought remain relevant to our direct experience and the development of reason. By fostering a commitment to systematic observation, logical consistency, and testable explanations, science can refine our understanding of fundamental questions about existence, consciousness, and the nature of reality. This panel discussion will consider the vital role of an interdisciplinary approach in education, bridging the science and humanities. This event will explore the complementarity of science, philosophy, and religion, highlighting how these fields can enrich one another in the pursuit of knowledge and truth. Such an approach is at the foundation of Stockton University's original mission. Our respective faculty panelists will share insights from their area of expertise, contributing to a meaningful and ongoing conversation at the intersection of the sciences and humanities. I will briefly introduce the panelists. Dr. Spinella, who is not present at the moment, is of the psychology department, and he specializes in physiological psychology, clinical neuropsychology, psychometrics, psychopharmacology, herbal medicines, executive functions, addiction, aging, and mental health. Philip Eaton of the physics department. Dr. Eaton specializes in physics education assessment analysis and construction of learning resources like online lectures and recorded demonstration videos. He also dabbles in introductory general relativity and quantum field theory projects with interested undergraduate students. Dr. Yi of the Philosophy and Religion Department. Dr. Yi specializes in Chinese religions, Buddhist philosophy, Confucianism, Taoism, Shamanism, and Hinduism. Finally, Richard Trama of the Academic Advising Team. Mr. Trama is the coordinator of school-based and credit completion LIBA programs, advising liaison for the William T. Daly School of General Studies and the School of Social and Behavioral Sciences. His area of expertise is in language and literature. We bring these four minds together here today to discuss the intersection of three complex topics: science, philosophy, and religion. I would now like to invite Richard Trama to start with opening statements.
Thank you. Okay, so what I suggested to Krishna was that I would lead off because I am the non-full-time faculty member on this committee and or presentation board, and I wanted to give background specific to liberal arts to segue into how the sciences and non-associated humanities really are humanities, tracing back to ancient Greek times. So I'll begin, although Kelly, you've probably heard this even from Roger numerous times. So let's be reminded that there were 7 liberal arts associated with education back in the Middle Ages that had their birth in ancient Greek times. They were divided into 2 schools. One they referred to the ancient Greeks as the trivium, which comprised the study of grammar, which is the building blocks of language, writing and speaking; logic, referring to rational form of discourse and reasoning; and rhetoric, referring to the art of persuasion, now referring to approaches to reading and writing. And most of you probably had a written comp class in some form your first year here. These 3 subjects comprise what the Greeks referred to as humanities. Then the second group that developed shortly after that, they referred to as a quadrivium, which was comprised of geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, and music. Be aware of the fact that while music is considered the humanities nowadays, think about the mathematical aspect of what makes music work, to the point where even physics studies music in terms of wave and length, rather than just a Taylor Swift song. No offense to anybody who is a Swiftie, seriously. So anyway, and then still later, after these original 7 subjects, the idea of medicine and architecture were thrown into the concept of liberal arts. Liberal arts did not, as you pointed out already in the introduction, it's not humanities, it's not arts and humanities. Liberal arts was a term that was given to the idea of the liber homo, which is the free man, and not free in the sense of how we see it now, or in the sense of the 1776 revolution, but the idea of, in terms of thought education, to developing a human existence to a fullest capacity as possible, so that that person or individual can contribute effectively to society, regardless of strengths or weaknesses. So what I wanted to show is that the liberal arts from its very beginning always included sciences and philosophy, especially with geometry, arithmetic, and astronomy, aware of the fact, you should be anyway, that back then these were the 3 areas that were most needed in education at the time. So the idea of quantum physics did not exist back in Pythagoras' time, but the idea of mass and movement, the idea of shape and how things worked, Euclidean geometry and stuff were important, which is why those maths were established then as one of these 7 areas of study. And I also wanted to show that the liberal arts from the very beginning always included sciences and philosophy, and yes, religion, which itself is an extension of philosophy for many. Even in our school, it's philosophy and religion. It's not either or. So the concept of liberal arts is by its nature interdisciplinary, stemming back from ancient times. in its complementarity. Early thinkers, the early practitioners, felt that the liberal arts led to the liber homo, or free man, gentleman, or good citizen, by good contributing to the betterment of society, not you behaved well. And if we even know our Shakespeare, you could be a really good contributor to society, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're well liked or nice. Or if you like more contemporary allusions, Little Riding Hood in Into the Woods, nice is different than good. Clearly, science with its advancements and explanations of the natural world, philosophy with its drives to think, reason, and explain all aspects of existence, and religion with its explications of what is harmful and what is useful to humanity, all complement the education, the development of the individual to be a good citizen. Through its interdisciplinarity and complementarity, liberal arts education does not entitle as much as empower. This is something that I think we're getting away from with the mechanization of higher education. Everybody thinks they just deserve this, as opposed to the fact of what it does for the individual and thereby what it does for beyond the individual. The extent of liberal arts empowers because it dares the subscriber to think critically, to see how different areas of studies that embrace different aspects of existence exist not in silos, but as farms, producing the nourishment for all to continue to produce the sustenance of mind, body, and spirit. So in itself, it becomes scientific to defend the fact that really the only reason why we're here is to procreate. We just have all these little games and thinking things to keep us busy, or else we would fall into that existential angst. Like, why are we here? Well, let's give ourselves purpose. I don't know if any of you get into all this exploration kind of thing. A Norwegian explorer, he's not actually an explorer, he's more of an adventurous, Erling Kagge, whose recent book, The North Pole, recounts his journey to be one of the first two people to ski to the North Pole as opposed to sail. In his recent account on his journey to ski to the North Pole, referencing the globe, he was referring to the globe itself. He said the globe helped foster an understanding that nature is connected. Water and ice, earth and stone, all are one. Especially when you get to the top where everything is, you can't, there's no way up past the North Pole. In fact, Kagge even subdivides the North Pole into 4 different categories, but I won't go into that too much. So even an avowed non-scientist who just wanted to reach the North Pole on skis sees the complementarity of the world enough to learn interdisciplinarily how to conquer that which rests, Kagge feels at least, in each of us, a pole unto ourselves. And that it exists in the minds inspired by what the Norwegians call eventerlust, which is like adventuresome. It's not quite wanderlust, but more of the idea, the obsession to having to find out something and eventually venturing towards it. Marvel of the imagination and on occasion both oral and written sources. So I'm not a member of the School of Natural Sciences and Mathematics. I am not a member, I was voted off the island years ago while I was here as full-time faculty off the island of ARHU, Arts and Humanities. So I now belong to the School of General Studies, mostly because the School of General Studies, no one understands what that's doing here anyway, except losers like us who, say, here, you want to study something? This is how you do it. But the foundations of everything that Stockton stands for as a liberal arts college and then university is in the School of General Studies. whose roots were in environmental sciences, by the way, and one that saw the values in other disciplines, disciplines that lead to connectedness of environment. So the idea is you can't just talk about physics without seeing how this relates to every other aspect of the world, which does include philosophy, arts and humanities, psychology, social sciences, etc. Somewhere or other, the School of Health Science fits in there. I'm still trying to figure that out. And that also for the School of Business. That embraces the concept of environment as well as the concrete aspects of environment. One of my roles as a member of the General Studies School is coordinator of the LIBA, which is a liberal arts degree. Traditionally, this liberal arts degree was for an individual to design the individual's own major. And in doing so, that individual had to get a committee together of at least two or more faculty, but at least two faculty members from different schools to help design a curriculum that would work in this design major that couldn't be found in any more prescribed major. Originally respected as a degree program that was individual driven, wherein the student could design his, her, or their own major, working with a team of at least two faculty members from different schools to pull together courses that worked in a truly interdisciplinary manner that would speak to the drives, interests, and goals of the student, encompassing a course of study that an established major did not address to the student's reasoning. We had maybe 1 to 3 a year. With this option, the degree open option truly embraces the liberal arts ethos, one that includes, indeed often requires the inclusion not only of science and philosophy and even religion in some capacity, but also the performing arts, fine arts, and social sciences. Fine arts differentiating from performing arts, that would be like painting, music, etc. Some other thoughts before turning it over to colleagues on science, philosophy, and religion regarding liberal arts. I just referred to Pythagoras earlier, a mathematician by subject in education, felt that education must come before philosophy, meaning that the process of liberal arts training in the liberal arts preceded a higher culture. Culture as one that included thinking and developing in the free man, the subjects of instruction, according to Aristotle, for free men who aspire not after what is immediately practical or useful, but after intellectual and moral excellence in general. Excellence. In essence, the liberal arts carried a meaning of the circle of disciplinary school studies, which ministered to the general education of youth preparatory to the higher liberal studies, which are compendiously called philosophy. That was written by Andrew Fleming in his article called The Seven Liberal Arts. Just to pull in the other science aspect of things, names to think about, thinkers of today's time who see the importance of all this interdisciplinarity. Something to keep in mind that there was a time that medicine and architecture were added to the liberal arts in the evolution of things post-Middle Ages because they were needed. And they also used in their research, how did all of this fit together? But according to Maritanus Capella, they did not elevate the mind, medicine and architecture. That's why they were not included traditionally or originally in the contemplation of abstract truth. However, by the time we get into the 20th and 21st century, think about architects like Frank Lloyd Wright, Frank Gehry, Zaha Hadid, who look at how architecture reflects certain psychological physical and emotional aspects of the environment and the individual. Or doctors like Lewis Thomas, Siddhartha Mukherjee, and Paul Kalanidhi, who use medicine as a means to explain being human, not just curing something. Yeah, take it over to the extent. Thank you.
So might as well just move down the line. If Professor Yi, you'd like to go next, go first.
My name is Jongbok Yi. I'm from the Philosophy and Religion program, and my main field is actually the Tibetan Buddhism, and particularly the Tibetan Buddhist philosophy. So when I asked by the former student Krishna, when he was always like holding a gallon of water
You remember?
in my Chinese philosophy course, right? And so when I asked, he asked me to talk about this like compatibility of the religion and the science. Then I was thought like maybe there are certain things like, because when I was in India in 2016, I joined His Holiness Dalai Lama's the conference called the Mind and Life Science, and which is very interesting the result, showing the interesting result of how the mind is neuroscience can show the proof the effectiveness of the meditation to in the daily life and so on. And particularly like how the meditation can increase the density of gray matter, and how it can actually help the amygdala and so on. So and then particularly the Buddhist meditation, including the tantric practice using a lot of visualization, and the neuroscience is actually proving that when there's a visualization of like legs and hands in the very vivid visualization, actually the part in the brain which actually move the legs and hands actually move together. Although there's no movement in your body, but still visualization itself actually to stimulate the brain to act in that way. So I thought that's very interesting. And then while I'm coming back, and then while I'm coming to here, I was thinking about then what does it mean by the compatibility? Like the science, of course, the science and Buddhism or science and religion and philosophy are the human things, and therefore everything can be conversational. Like we can actually talk from the Buddhism from the scientific viewpoint, and then we can talk about the Buddhism from borrowing the scientific theories, right? And then there's a book written by His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama about the book called the Universe in a Single Atom, and it is about how for example there are many different philosophical traditions in Buddhism. One of them is called the Namma-Sangika, the school, and then the Theravada Buddhist schools, which they mention that everything is actually based on the particles, which is the indivisible, the minute particles, which is they can actually stick together because it doesn't have a space, but they can actually drift together in by the certain strengths actually build up these matters and so on. Which if we borrow the recent scientific explanation, then maybe you can say that about the quantum theory or the superstring theory even. But then the other school actually criticized that school and then said that something is wrong, because if you think it's matter is matter, and then if there's any changes, then that's wrong. And therefore the other schools actually rely on and say that the reality is actually time, not the space itself. And then they move to next school saying that everything is dependent on how you observe. Things change by your observation. And therefore everything actually up to your mind. That's called the mind-only school. And then the next school says that when you say that everything is actually depends on how you observe. Like the phenomena, the nature is depends on your thought. Then the next question asking like, then where is your thought? What is the core nature of your thought? And according to Buddhism, everything is actually anatma. Means like there's no self, like there's nothing ever inherently exists forever. And therefore, if someone think that the mind itself exists forever, or the mind even temporarily exists to stand alone, outside of the causal impact, then that's wrong. So the next school said that everything depends on mind, but mind itself is actually changing too. So then when you say how we have the comparable or compare the science and Buddhism, then which school we should compare? Like among all these schools. So I think in that sense, His Holiness Dalai Lama is quite effective, because instead of trying to compare all these scientific or the Buddhist kind of systems, he focused on the practical thing called mind and the effect of meditation. But still, this has a limitation too, because when you practice the meditation, of course, there's many the effects you can find through the fMRI and so on. That the mind can be induced to the the stream, the wave, by means of fully focus on, and then even you can change your daily life or improve your daily life by means of the meditation. But the goal of Buddhist meditation is not to have a happy life. The ultimate goal of Buddhist meditation is to cut off your ignorance, which is seeing the things as inherently existence, and thereby gradually removing all your mistakes, and then you establish the virtue and then good marriage, and therefore you cut off the stream of in samsara, means secret existence, continuous rebirth.
Hey, Professor Spinella, we have to tell you.
And therefore there is a certain limitation of explaining Buddhism through the neuroscience. And I think Dalai Lama is very happy to that part, because according to his book, the universe in a single atom, and instead of trying to reduce, because the reductionism is very difficult, the dangerous thing in any the scholastic traditions. So instead, we should try to reduce the science under Buddhism. He said that then what Buddhism can contribute to science, while there's many things actually the science can contribute to Buddhism, means there are many theories and many recent theories and older theories that can explain many things, the many time systems which was explained in Buddhism. Then what Buddhism can do to science? What will be the Buddhist contribution to science, or what will be contribution of all the spiritual traditions in the world to science? And the Dalai Lama's suggestion is that instead of trying to reduce science under the umbrella of Buddhism, the Buddhism or any spiritual tradition try to maybe contribute to the scientific discovery or development by means of suggesting ethical standard. So of course it means all maybe just major, even the religious traditions need to sit together and then find what kind of ethical standard we need to do. But the main theory is that when Buddhism, for example, Buddhism and all other religions actually emphasize the importance of love and importance of the compassion, and therefore what Dalai Lama suggests is that if we let the science do all its works within the framework of loving kindness and the compassion, and when all these discoveries can actually prove the health and contribute to the development of all sentient beings, not only Buddhist, the human beings, because from the scope of Buddhism, all beings, including the ants and the fish and the birds and the squirrels and your dogs and cats and human beings, everything, including gods, not gods, are sentient beings. Means that they will eventually perish and they will reborn. And therefore, when the science is based on these two things, like altruistic mind and compassion, then the Dalai Lama said, let science do their own work instead of trying to bring the science to explain Buddhism. I think if we think about the compatibility, then I think that the important thing is try not to reduce one thing into the other, but instead try to respect the other field and see its development. And if there's anything communicable, then bring the topic to come in communicable way. And then the going toward the development of the helping other beings. I think that's what the goal of compatibility of Buddhism and science to me. So that's it.
Thank you, Professor Eaton. So we'll continue down the line to Professor Eaton, and then we'll come to Professor Spinella.
Okay. So might take a very different approach to this, but we'll see. I'm gonna try and speak more from a science perspective, but I'm a physicist first, so that's gonna be what I'm gonna sit my kind of house in. When I was thinking about this topic, immediately I understood the rich connection between science and philosophy, and I'll talk about that. I understood the intuitive connection between philosophy and religion. I get that one. And then it's when I got to science and religion, and of course it's the scientist is the one that has the issue with religion, of course. Is I understand how science can help inform religion. I'll talk about that. Where I struggle is understanding how religion can come back and inform science. We'll talk about that. So that's where I'm coming from with this whole thing, if you're curious. I hope my comments reflect the greater scientific community, but just again, keep in mind, I'm a physicist first, and I understand the philosophical quandaries within that. So to start, in science, we build models. First and foremost, that's what we do. We build models to explain the world around us. Those models are then fit against experimental data, and we either strip the model because it didn't work, or the model fits the data and we accept it. A prime example is Newtonian gravity. Newtonian gravity was originally proposed in about 1666, and it was revolutionary. It explained gravity near the surface of the Earth, and when applied to the solar system, it worked amazingly well. Until our technology got better, and we found out that Newtonian gravity failed to fully predict the orbit of Mercury. That is when in 1915, a new theory of gravity had to come out proposed by Einstein called general relativity. That explained gravity near the surface of the Earth. It explained gravity in the solar system, and it properly explained the orbit of Mercury. And then we looked farther out across the entire galaxy, and we found out that Einstein's theory of gravity fails when you look out across all of the entire galaxy. And that's where the idea of dark matter comes into play. It's an ingredient we had to add into the theory because we know the data doesn't match the theory. This is the story of the scientific method, at least the Western conception of it. Models are proposed, tested against data, and we either refine them or we restrict their domain and we say they're useful as long as you stay within where they're applicable. Where philosophy enters this discussion for me is really frankly straightforward, is it helps us interpret our models. For example, Einstein's theory of general relativity is a super straightforward scientific model to interpret. It lends itself to one interpretation of us traveling through space-time, and gravity is the curvature of that space-time. And that's it. It's beautiful. It's amazing. We have other theories in physics that don't lend themselves to proper or simple interpretations. One primary example is quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is an astonishing theory. It has beat every single experimental test we've thrown at it, but it fails in the sense that it does not lend itself to one philosophical interpretation. For those of you who don't know, at its core, and this is going to be a drastic oversimplification of quantum mechanics, Quantum mechanics tells us that things in the universe are not set in stone. Things are probabilistic. There are a set of potential outcomes, and there are probabilities assigned to each of those. Quintessential example we can give is an electron in an atom. The electron exists not as a single point floating around a nucleus, but as a fuzz existing around the nucleus, and it could be anywhere in that fuzz. You don't know where until you go to take a measurement. Any position within that fuzz is a viable position. And once you go take a measurement, you find the electron in a position. All of those possibilities and all of those probabilities are wrapped up into something we call the wave function. The issue is we don't know what the wave function is. We do not know how to interpret it. And heck, we don't even actually understand how the universe goes about picking an answer. When we go and make a measurement, we have no idea how the universe decides where to put the electron. We don't know how time works at all in the quantum realm. Maybe time is quantized as well, and we're just jumping from one instance to the next like one giant cosmic flip book. We don't know how quantum mechanics lends itself to an interpretation of the multiverse. Maybe every single decision actually happens and it fragments the universe every single time into billions and billions of copies every single instant that we're around. Time travel. Is it possible? These are all things that physics, brings up that are allowed within our models, but we can't properly interpret them into one cohesive philosophical interpretation. The kind of rule of thumb that we always give for, or at least the explanation we give for quantum mechanics at least, is that it's referred to as philosophically incomplete. It has many, many, many interpretations, all that are distinctly different, but result in the same reality. General relativity does not do this. It has one interpretation, one reality. Quantum mechanics, slightly more complicated than that. And that, to me, is where philosophy at least comes in and digs its teeth in. It answers questions, or helps us answer questions like, what is reality? What's causality? What's probability? So on and so forth. And this isn't new. Philosophy's been doing this for a while. We've had Descartes, we've had Popper, we've had Kuhn, we had many, many, many philosophers throughout all of the ages who have shaped science, fundamentally at its core have shaped science. So this is something that immediately becomes apparent. Without philosophy, we run the risk of misinterpreting our mathematical models as actual fact rather than the models they actually are. And this is actually something that I have issue with science right now in general. Physicists are very bad about that. But physics doesn't just help us interpret science. It also gives us a path towards answering questions that science can't answer. For example, like I said, what's the nature of time? Does the universe have a purpose, or is it just impersonal laws that govern us? All of these things are different things that philosophy can help us get our teeth into. But I haven't talked about religion yet, and I said I was going to. So religion enters in for me in a very awkward way. And I'll admit, I'm extremely skeptical. If you can't tell, I think science can say a lot about religion, and I will be the first one to admit I do not think religion can say much about science. That does not mean I do not appreciate that other people have a different viewpoint. I fully understand how people can use their religion or their conception of religion to inform how they do science, how they interpret their science, so on and so forth. I fully appreciate that. One of the biggest points you can always see it in is within moral arguments. Is it okay to do this in science? Is it not okay to do this in science? So on and so forth. I do want to make the point of saying I don't think religion is actually necessary for moral argumentation. I think ethical reasoning doesn't take religion for a good person to say that vaccines are good, global warming's bad, clean energy's good, so on and so forth. It doesn't take religion to do that. But some people can use their religion to help them justify those things, and I fully understand where that perspective is coming from. That being said, and this I think will help illustrate my stance on where I view religion, is I view religion less about explaining the world and more about how we respond to the world. That is my take on religion, and I understand that's not how everybody interprets it. So religion doesn't need to be a competing theory with science or philosophy, but it is one of those things where history has given us a bit of warning that when religion tries to take its influence of science too far, things get bad. For example, when the Catholic Church incorporated Aristotelian physics into its theology, and then we found out during the scientific revolution that the Earth, in fact, is not at the center of the universe, it led to tension. It led to scientists being excommunicated from the church. It led to nowadays, we have people who still call upon that time period and say, and this is why religion is bad. It led to, an unnecessary tension that if we would have, I think, kept to our individual strengths, we would have been better off for it, which I think echoes what Jongbok was saying too, I think. So I think the lesson here is that philosophy, science, and religion are better off working alongside one another, and you use the strengths of each when it's appropriate. What does that word appropriate mean? I don't know. I don't have an exact answer to that. I think it's one of those where you kind of know it when you see it in that instance. Fundamentally, though, at least for me, what it all boils down to, just to finish my time, is science, philosophy, and religion, at least to me, answer different questions. Science answers what? You hand me a ball, and science will tell you what it's made of and what will happen if you throw it across the room. Philosophy answers the how. How were those observations important, and how do those observations fit into a wider philosophical framework that then could be used to apply to explain a greater deal of information. Religion then explains the why. Why does it all even matter? And that is where I think I'm going to end my time. There we go.
Thank you, Professor Eaton. Thank you very much. Thank you. Professor Spinella, if you'd like to start.
Yeah,
the statement.
with the statement, yeah, sure. I'm going to read this a little bit more than ad lib it. So the wish to integrate science and spirituality is an understandable one, right? Wanting to reduce a sense of discord between systems of thought considered by many people to be fundamentally important, but also it's seemingly incompatible at times. Orthodox theologians sometimes adhere rigidly and literally to doctrines, while on the other hand, mystics and many religious traditions take a more flexible approach. So while science is empirical and based on repeated confirmation of hypotheses and incremental growth in knowledge, scientists are not free from dogmatic thinking, as evident in many scientific debates. However, scientists, particularly physicists of the 20th century, had reached a point where they realized that in order to progress, and I'm specifically talking about quantum mechanics, they not only had to take the phenomena they're studying into account, but also the awareness that observed the phenomena. So scientists like Bohr, Heisenberg, Einstein openly wrote about how our scientific principles are approximations of reality and not reality itself. They're reliable and robust approximations, but approximations nonetheless. Niels Bohr, for example, noted that subatomic particles are not to be taken literally and are best understood as interdependent phenomena rather than individual entities. And to quote him, he said, isolated material particles are abstractions, their properties being definable and observable only through their interaction with other systems, right? That comes very close to the Buddhist and some other ideas of interdependence and dependent origination. With proper mindset and a healthy skepticism and a probing curiosity, significant progress can be made in the integration of science and spirituality, especially when it comes to the aspect known as non-duality. So this is the aspect that I would emphasize as the most useful in this dialogue. It's the least subject to doctrines and dogmatism because there's a minimum of belief involved. Non-duality literally means that the sense of separation of being an observer apart from the world being observed is diminished or collapses entirely, right? So this is just a subjective sense. The eventual result of these practices is a profound state of meta-awareness that confers an enormous capacity for the self-regulation of cognition, emotion, and behavior. And so this is where the psychological part of it comes in. The result of this shift towards meta-awareness, of awareness being aware of awareness, right? The result of this shift includes a tendency towards a deep, undisturbable sense of peace and a strong tendency towards compassion. This does not mean mystical superpowers or utter moral perfection, but exercises to develop a higher degree of meta-awareness predisposes people towards well-being and altruism. So we've seen this in not only traditional contexts across many generations, but even in recent research. coming from psychology and neuroscience, I would emphasize that regardless of a person's worldview, scientific or otherwise, you kind of have to admit that this aspect of meta-awareness I'm talking about, the brain is encased inside the skull, right? And it has no direct access to the outside world, but it needs access to the outside world. We need to know what to do, how to function in the world, how to survive, how to flourish and thrive, right? So damage to specific systems produces reliable changes in cognition, emotion, behavior, perception, et cetera, right? But the hard problem of consciousness is nowhere near being addressed. The so-called easy problem of consciousness is that we can find neural correlates of consciousness. We can find what's going on in the brain that seems to correspond to conscious awareness and other mental processes. Whereas the hard problem is, why is there even consciousness in the first place? Why don't we just have this machinery running and, you know, no awareness involved, right? So ongoing work is continuing to expand that understanding. Since the brain has no direct access to the outside world, it has to rely on sensory information in order to create perceptual representations inside the brain. And what starts off as literal representations, in other words, the orientation of a line causes a specific kind of representation in the brain that corresponds to that. It's elaborated in subsequent stages of processing into more and more abstract and symbolic representations in the brain. And it's highly predictive in manner. So in other words, when you're perceiving something, a large proportion of what's going on is your brain is guessing on what's going on out there. And then only modifying that guess if it's not in accordance with how things are, right? So there's a huge amount of prediction and guessing going on. The above outline of neural processing is so simple that it taught to freshmen and undergraduate students, in introductory psychology courses, right? And we continue to elaborate on these models, but what's almost universally underappreciated in neuroscience and psychology is the implications of this. We can never experience the actual world as it is. It looks like we're sitting in a room right now and looking out at the world, but that's not possible. It looks like there's a little me inside the head peeking out the windows of the eyes and looking at the world. And from a neuroscience perspective, that's insane. But yet that's how most of us live. That's our most intuitive model of how things work. So in a very real sense, everything that we experience is made of awareness. We're living in again, from a neuroscience perspective, we're living in a brain-made virtual reality simulation of the world and not the actual world. So in the sense that if you go into a dream, if you're dreaming, you know, a tree in the dream is not made out of wood, right? It's made out of awareness. It's made out of mind stuff. The water in a dream is not made out of H2O, right? It's made out of mind stuff. So in the same way, when we're awake, we're experiencing a representation of reality, not reality itself, which means this table is not made out of wood, or this, you know, board is not made out of plastic, or whatever else it's supposed to be made out of, right? So our perception experiences come from somewhere. It's not that there's no real world out there. We can't say that. That would be, you know, nihilism. But at the same time, we don't have to take it as literally as we think it is, right? So Donald Hoffman's a cognitive scientist. He said, I take my experiences seriously, but not literally. He articulated the most scientific approach to non-duality, I think, and he called it the interface theory of perception. So in his model, it's like if we're, you know, using a computer, the computer doesn't show you what's going on inside there. It doesn't show you microcircuits and electrons and all those kinds of, you know, elaborate machinery going on inside the computer. It shows you a simplified representation that you can work with. And what his idea is that evolution provided us a simplified representation, like an interface, a user interface to work with the world, almost the same way Windows allows you to work with the computer, right? Those little representations are too complex and require too much of the brain's processing power and provide more detail than necessary. So for an evolutionary sense, it simplified it to make it more energy efficient and a more elegant way of interacting, right? So while our sensory perceptual systems attempt to create the most accurate map of reality, it's important to remember that we are engaging with the map and not the actual land, so to speak. This metacognitive awareness or meta-awareness is critical not only from a philosophical point of view, but from a psychological and scientific one. Right, so there's meta-analyses of meditation, for example, showing that it increases well-being, it reduces adverse mental states, it changes brain development, particularly in frontal polar cortex is involved in self-awareness and meta-awareness, right? Another interesting thing from a philosophical scientific point of view is that frontal polar cortex is involved in telling the difference between what's internal versus external, which when it comes to Buddhist philosophy and Advaita philosophy, that's a very important thing. Not surprisingly, frontal polar cortex is involved in meta-awareness. So when a person's dreaming versus when a person is lucid dreaming, right? So lucid dreaming is when a person knows the dream is a dream, it's meta-awareness. Frontal polar cortex is more active when the person's lucid dreaming versus non-lucid dreaming. Right? The fact that we don't interface directly with actual reality or ultimate reality in non-dual systems is not a problem for scientific inquiry. Scientific investigations take place inside this cognitive simulation of reality. As Niels Bohr expressed, again, my favorite, he said, ultimately, every observation, of course, can be reduced to our sense perceptions. So scientists, we regularly rely on equipment that extends our awareness beyond what it normally would be, telescopes, microscopes, gas chromatograph, et cetera, right? And it's understood by many scientists that we deal with hypotheses and mental models of how reality functions, which we repeatedly test in order to tease apart how reality seems to function. Right? Carlo Rovelli, for example, is a physicist who expressed appreciation of Nagarjuna's middle way philosophy, which is a non-dual aspect of Buddhism. He showed how he indicated that it actually improves scientific thinking, opening up our mindsets to uncertainty and inspiring the investigation of phenomena without getting stuck in absolutist thinking or chasing after fixed endpoints. Neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett extensively points out that we experience a cognitive representation of reality, as I just said, that's conditioned by predictive processing again. Okay? And that's a big part of her emphasis. Skip forward a little bit here. I think I'll stop with that. That's it for now. Thank you.
So we greatly appreciate all of our professors sharing their opening statements about what their perspective on this topic is. And now we're hoping the next phase of our program will be a discussion amongst you based on what you picked up from each other's opening statements, what points for discussion you think should be further explored, depending on how much of there exists between the four of you. The audience might have some points. I have some points if there's time, but it's not the most important thing. So let's start with the four of you, whatever cross pollination you have.
Start with the common denominating factor is awareness, and how both of you, even though Jongbok, it's implied the idea of what a model is and testing the model. And then go back to the interdisciplinary aspect of these things, that it is not just unto itself, but how it's interpreted, so that one thing cannot, whether it's a discipline or an object, exist unto itself without the awareness that is based on the model and the testing. So there's that connectedness and interdisciplinary aspect as a concept, not as a subject to only a subject to study at a university, but the idea that this is what I see, this is what I think I see, even with the meta cognitive aspects, a whole movement in literature as metafiction, where modernism coming from this, coming from that, postmodernism, what happens after postmodernism?
Postmodern.
Correct. No, that's exactly. I did an MLA conference called postmodern,
Yep.
just as a sarcastic thing.
Yeah.
Because it's like you get smaller and smaller, forget about like quarks and everything else, it's going to be smaller and smaller.
Even as a sarcastic thing, how are they defining postmodern?
Well, it can't be defined in a definition that one could walk out of an hour-long panel discussion and say, this is the next wave. Because it's just what it is, it's a wave. But no one, the wave can go this way, the wave can go that way. There is no real postmodernism in terms of, at least in terms of literature, in terms of fiction.
Yeah.
I think what Professor Trama is picking up on this underlying current of the role of consciousness in each of your presentations. Professor Eaton was talking about how in quantum physics, consciousness becomes a must. You can't ignore it anymore. Professor Yi was talking about how Buddhism is based on meditation and how that meditation can give rise to ethical principles that can help inform scientific investigation. That's meditation is the cultivation of consciousness. Professor Spinella is talking about the neuroscience aspect of consciousness and the non-dual aspect of how everything is within consciousness, even our material, you can use the word presuppositions about the world. Those are existing in consciousness. And what does that imply about our science, our materialistic science? Professor Trama is speaking about consciousness. He mentioned how the world is a unity when the guy went to the North Pole. So to have this concept of a unity, there's a unified consciousness which is observant, including all these fields of study and how they relate to that individual within a conscious experience. So this seems like a great commonality to start, pollinating this discussion. Consciousness, the role of consciousness, the role of consciousness in education from various fields, what can be said about it, how it applies to these fields, how this inspires further interdisciplinary dialogue. I think that's a great jumping off point.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing to point, a question that at least immediately jumps out to me with that is, if we didn't have consciousness, would we actually do anything? Like, as weird as that is to say, would we actually do anything if we didn't have consciousness? Because it was, you said it earlier that ultimately from natural selection perspective, we're here to procreate, and then everything else we could do is just kind of entertain ourselves, right? But I mean, on the same hand of that is did consciousness develop just to give ourselves something to do? An interesting question.
Entertainment.
Yeah, literally. Yeah.
Yeah, according to the Buddhist tantric system, which discuss the stages of death, right? The 7 stages of death, so according to that, our medical UDDA definition of death is very superficial for death. And then there will be the sequence of the more subtler death, and eventually when at the end of the moment of death, there will be mind of clear light, which depends on just one particle of energy. So here energy is not actually a shape, but just energy itself, because in Buddhist tantric system, the most smallest unit of matter is energy. And it says that there's a mind is always bind together. So in that sense, everything is actually mind and matter at the same time. So however, there is no mention of any universal or the gigantic mind watching over us, just like Big Mother China. So I think in Buddhist way of thinking is how to push off how far we can push off the causality to think further. For example, if we see the Hinduist viewpoint, then there's the very strong relation between Brahman and Atman. The Brahman as a creator and Atman as a small shadow of the Brahman, and therefore these two natures same. So in that sense, they are considered as independent, permanent, and unitary. And if you see like, of course, there are many the systems like Sankhya and Nyaya and so on, other systems. But all they insist is that the permanent self called Atma exists as like the detached from or outside of causality. And while the Buddhism is saying that there's the Atma doesn't exist, because if you say that there's causality, and if you think that there's a God who actually can interfere this causality and then make things happen, then the God must have the same nature with the causality itself. And in that sense, causality actually can be converted into time. And therefore, then the God is actually not permanent but impermanent. And therefore, there's no God which can be called as the super superior to everything. So in that sense, so from the Buddhist viewpoint, I think that's why the Dalai Lama said the Buddhism is like we can have a talk. And the thing is because most of religions are closed books. Means like when the theory was made like 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago, it's already, they believe that that's already closed book, which was completely set. Then while the science is inherently provisional, so they constantly change the theory. Now we are in the tradition of the quantum the mechanics and so on. But first, what will be in the next? Then how can we actually do so? The Buddhism is in that sense, the Dalai Lama says that if science is right, then the Buddhism need to change its tenet system. I think unless the religion becomes the open book system, like always open to the change theory toward the scientific advancement, then I think I'm a little skeptical about the compatibility of the religion and science. But for example, as we know, the Big Bang theory was made by a Catholic father, right? To prove the existence of God, but actually it disproves the existence of God, right? And therefore, I think it should be open book. The religion should be open book to be compatible with the science.
One theme I think that Professor Yi is pointing out to the general observation that religion in the Eastern world has a very different nature than religion in the Western world. Religion in the East, both in the Vedantic traditions and Buddhist traditions and the Sikh traditions, it's not siloed from other aspects. The religion necessarily has philosophy at its foundation, and it's scientific from the perspective that a lot of them basically have the presumption of consciousness as fundamental, and the different development and relations that exist within that consciousness, or the presumptions that it makes and the reaction that occurs from that presumption. So from the Eastern perspective, this is all science, philosophy, and religion. There was never a separation between them. It's only in the West that a separation came up. And the other aspect I think Professor Yi was pointing at is there's an ontological aspect of religion, especially from this Eastern perspective, which is what makes it relevant to science and which actually informed the forming of science from Galileo and Descartes and Newton. They were theists, and they had this theological presumption of reality that it was rational. So because of this assumption that reality was rational because it was created from a rational divinity, then it could be known. So so when you look at axioms in science, things that science has to assume in order to progress further, one of those axioms is called the intelligibility of nature, right? We have to assume that we can know something about nature through observation. Only then can we proceed to develop science. And that presumption was made by these fathers of modern science who were theists because they believed in a rational God who had a rational creation, thus they could come to know the mind of God through empirical observation. So there's an argument to be made based on how we see materialistic oriented people these days who want to deny purpose and mind in nature. They couldn't have made that presumption to start science off because there's no reason for them to think that nature was rational, so why could they come to know it? So it's this ontological aspect of religion that not only inspired the founding fathers of modern science, but also is relevant towards this development of consciousness studies, because it's making a statement about a universal aspect of consciousness. Professor Eaton was talking about the collapse of the wave function at an atomic scale, but what about the collapse of the universal wave function? You know, like these are questions that we can have in the ontology that religion suggests has a place in the conversation. I don't know, what do you all think of that kind of thing? It's
I'm always
so different.
wondering, like for example, as you know that our thought has a certain the speed of thinking. So like when we practice meditation, for example, then when you observe the aspect which origin through the meditative stabilization, and then even before, like when we start to aware, as you said, like meta aware about the things happening in your body and mind, like emotions and so on, then actually there's a certain limitation of catching up the speed of things actually happening. Right. So I asked this is the thesis advisor, because there's the talk about what is minute moment of time, and then the minute moment of time is actually much coarse than the minute the unit of time which is talking in the science. So in that sense, so I asked like what how do you know that there is so many the changes beyond the minute the unit of time? Then my thesis was said that that's assumption. So it's not science. It's actually the based on assumption that because of this, because of that, based on all this reasoning, and therefore I think from my viewpoint, the meditation, using the meditation as a scientific way to see what's happening in the world has its limitation of speed of thinking. And from the one of the schools in Buddhism, it says that actually, as you said, things we are seeing is actually not actual things. It's not reality, because there's a even small amount of time gap between my laptop and the eyes, and then even the signal to our brain. And therefore, what you're seeing is actually, in that sense, what you're seeing is actually a representation of our mind. And I think that's interesting point, but still, so when you think about how can we actually approach the reality subtly, in the subtle way, then I think the religion has certain limitations.
What you're saying, when we're talking about time resolution
Right.
and awareness, neuroscience has kind of wandered into a dark alley that I don't think it knows how to get out of just yet. But there's, for example, if I snap my finger, right, I feel the sensation, I see the movement, and I hear the movement at the same time, right? And they're all simultaneous. But the amount of time that it takes for the vision to get to my visual cortex and the touch sensation and the hearing sensation, they all happen at different time scales. And somehow our brain just kind of edits it together like a movie theater and just synchronizes and goes, oh, everything's fine, don't worry about it, So there's like a magic trick going on every single moment that we're experiencing things. And when we get down to that time scale, then it's interesting how that works. It's still mysterious from a neuroscience point of view.
And I know something that I'm going to use the word pushback. I'm going to push back a little bit on the idea that the need for religion to advance, that began science with like Galileo and whatnot. Because so at least in the Western sciences, the sciences itself started with like Thales and the Greek philosophers in an attempt to actually remove gods from explanations. So I'm not sure I totally agree with the idea that wanting to know the mind of God was the only way or the only reason to actually advance in science, when at least Western science in the Mediterranean area started with actually a push to remove gods from rational explanation and discussion. So I think there's a more to that picture than than meets the eye. Because I know like there's certain theories that go into it where like one is that more had to do like, so one idea that's out there is that it has more to do with like guiding principles and laws and less to do with like knowing the mind of God. So that because they were in societies where there was cause and effect rationality rather than like Taoism, where less cause and effect and more yin yang, that is what enabled them to develop Western science in the way that it managed to develop. But I don't know enough about those to be able to speak any form of authoritatively on it.
I don't want to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I think what's something that's useful to keep in mind here is our definitions also often fall short.
Yes.
So
100%.
what do we mean by God? What do we mean by religion? What do we mean by science even sometimes? If I look at like the Advaita, literature, or just Hinduism in general, if you look at the earliest, Vedas, it's very ritualistic chants and praise. And then by the time you get to the Upanishads, it's almost like pure consciousness that they're talking about. So in across any religion, not just Hinduism, the concept of what God means, and some people it's a personified, the sky daddy, and other times it's more like just this abstract principle, like the Tao, the ultimate reality, Brahman, emptiness. Those are the same kind of ideas. I think the mystics, the more mystical, contemplative branches of religion tend to be more towards the abstract principle rather than the personified, reified being. But it's one of those things you also can't put your finger on it. Whenever it's like a fuzzy range rather than one specific. Here, people think this, people think that. So I think it's reconcilable. I tend not to use the G word for that reason, because it goes right into that personification. And then, so not only is there a personified God, but he also likes me, and he also tends to agree with everything I think, and that gets into fundamentalism, right? That's what we're all trying to avoid, right? But when you get to the more contemplative side of it, that there's a lot more flexibility and understanding there. That's I consider. Well, I mean, there's a lot of people like Hindus who are scientists and, who can appreciate both of those. So.
Well, no, just to play off of that a little bit, I find it super interesting that the more we advance in science, the more science can inform us about religion.
Yeah.
It becomes more apparent
Yeah.
because like I said with Aristotle, like we held on to Aristotle for centuries and it was wrong. And then once that fell down, and it took part of the Catholic Church with it, we've advanced so far now that we've kind of pushed the need for a God of the gaps so far out to the fringes that it's like, so we have the Big Bang now, and then everybody's like, well, what came before that? And then some people immediately are like, God did it. And it's like, well, no, we'll figure it out. Like, so I think it's interesting in the sense that these like personified gods, I feel like, are getting pushed more and more closer to a more holistic Eastern form of religion, in my opinion. Yeah.
Professor Trama, were you going to say something?
Just to throw out some things for exposure purposes that kind of capture a lot of the discussion. If you have not read Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell, you really owe it to yourself to read it. It's talk about the meta and then the pushing out to the fringes, a narrative that starts at one end chronologically, goes towards an inexorable outcome, and then just stops and goes backwards back to the beginning, so that it is not circular as much as ovular, but in a Morbius strip sort of way, and how everything is interconnected in that sense of consciousness, capturing that last breath concept, and then having it infuse a whole other life in the next section of the book or chapter, all surrounded by the composition of a piece of music. So Cloud Atlas refers to the symphony that one of the characters is composing. And they're all, it's just probably one of the strongest novels of the last 25, 50 years that has been written in any language. To that other topic then is, and look into David Mitchell's other novels, but specifically The Thousand Autumns of Jacob de Zoet, which really does capture that, like what happens with that last moment where you have a group of monks all over Japan, Tsushima, Japan, trying to capture the breaths of these certain people in order to prolong existence or a consciousness. And then the other thing I just want to throw out is that obviously something's going on if a movie like Oppenheimer can win Best Film in 2020s, and you have one of the great operas composed about Oppenheimer, called Dr. Atomic. It says something. These things could not be done outside of that realm of consciousness at that moment. And be aware of the fact that Galileo paid a horrible, horrible price for what he did do in terms of questioning and trying to bring together a consciousness. Not to mention, he got away. He wasn't burned at the stake like most of his contemporaries, who turned around and said, "The Earth really?" The minute he said Earth, he got in trouble. and any type of gravitational pull. But anyway, just ideas to think about and expose yourselves to.
Two comments about Aristotle, and then the discussion about the value of a personalist theistic model, different perspective. Yeah. So when we're talking about the motivations of early Greeks to get their scientific approach going versus the modern fathers, the Greeks were coming from this polytheistic culture that not all the ancient Greeks subscribed to. So I think when they were trying to get away from gods, right, like you mentioned, there was a plural. So it's this view where everyone is going to worship this personification of nature and divisions that can cause in a culture based on, you can imagine. But Aristotle and Plato, they were not really subscribing to that polytheistic view. And while a lot of Aristotle's ideas of the flat earth obviously are not correct, I mean, Aristotle is considered to this day the father of modern biology for a reason. Not that all of his ideas have been pushed out at all. He gave us this approach, his four aspects of causality, right? The material cause, the efficient cause, the formal cause, and the final cause. And historically, when we got to the point of those modern fathers, they, ironically, you can look in their writings, they specifically wanted to get rid of the formal and final, and they kept the material and efficient. And that caused a lot of problems with recognizing purposes in nature, teleology. And that has made a tremendous comeback in the 20th century in biology, because biology without teleology is impoverished. When they talk about organ functions and cells making up tissues with these functions, those functions are only seen on the perspective of the order above the action of the cells or molecules. Like when you look at the level of the molecules in a heart, you don't see a heartbeat. You have to look at the organ as a whole. And the role of that heartbeat doesn't make sense unless it's contextualized in the organism as a whole. So you have scientists today like James Shapiro, Dennis Noble, who are talking about, they specifically are making an effort to bring the word teleology back to show that this was a mistake. So this is important because it also affects the view of cognition in living entities. A lot of times we're taught that consciousness or cognition or any form of mind requires a nervous system. but you have, I mean, so people like James Shapiro, who's a molecular biologist at Chicago University, is writing papers about how every single cell is cognitive because it has to make decisions, it has to cooperate, it has to deal with novel situations that it wasn't equipped to deal with. It has to come up with solutions to those problems. And by these three criteria, they're saying every living cell is cognitive. So we can't just assume that it takes a nervous system and consciousness is an emergent property of the nervous system. At the cellular level, every cell is exhibiting some type of cognition. However, impoverished it might be to higher levels of cognition. And you even have animals without nervous systems, jellyfish, right? Invertebrates. So this idea of consciousness as fundamental, which is something which the Eastern traditions have held for a very long time, starts to gain some scientific backing with these observations of purpose-oriented organismic functions, conscious decision-making at various scales, and the relationship between the organisms and the environment. So this, in one way, we have to respect what Aristotle did. In that way, we should, in my humble opinion, I don't think we should just make universal statements that Aristotle is dead, because this is something which his contribution was valid. No doubt there was also aspects which are no longer here and they shouldn't be. And then, so just getting to the whole personal theistic view, looking at it from the self-centered perspective, whereas Dr. Spinella said, yeah, God's the man in the sky and he likes me and wants my perspective to be obviously that's not, no doubt people hold that, unfortunately, and wars throughout history have been fought because of this kind of thinking, unfortunately. But that's not really a theistic view, because the theistic worldview always holds that God is the center stage and as the infinite context of the finite diversity that is life. And when it's talking about a personal theism, which is something like the Bhagavat tradition, and there's so many schools of Vedanta, the Bhagavat tradition, which is coming from the Bhagavatam or the Bhagavad Purana. When it talks about personal theism, it's talking about that reality is a whole, and that whole has not just consciousness, but self-consciousness. And the argumentation is that if we as parts of reality have self-consciousness, which we can all attest to, since we're parts of that whole, whatever characteristics we're having must be finding their origin in that whole. That whole also has self-consciousness, just like when we take a slice of pizza, whatever qualities that slice of pizza has is coming from whatever that whole pizza was. So it gives a little more sophisticated angle for what is meant by a personalist theism, that we're part of a whole, and that whole is interconnected in dynamic ways, and our scientific knowledge is to try to understand what those relationships and purposes are, and with very rigorous approach. But that what if we are thinking that consciousness is fundamental, and not just consciousness, but beyond that self-consciousness, where a whole entity is conscious of itself, this meta-awareness, then this is where the personal view of theism starts to gain a little more credence and kind of becomes less superstitious, but has more philosophical kind of backing. That's my.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, because I was parroting a little bit. What I was parroting was the fundamentalist kind of view, and not what you're talking. What you're saying is very reasonable. It's an interesting philosophical avenue, I think, that we all need to explore. I think that the fundamental problem, and this is maybe coming a little bit more from the Buddhist background, is our tendency to reify. We have a tendency to take phenomena that are not a single localized thing, and then take it and treat the abstract idea of that as if it were a real thing itself. Chandrakirti is just a Buddhist philosopher to improvise on his idea. I mean, if we had a car, you see a car in front of you, go, that's a thing, that's one thing. But if we took those pieces apart into thousands of pieces and spread them dozens of miles apart, you would say there's no car here. But in fact, all of those pieces still exist, they're just far apart, and our perceptual system doesn't recognize. Our perceptual system wants to clump things together and go, that's a thing, that's a thing, that's a thing, to try to make sense of things, as opposed to that more abstract sense, which our brains don't kind of get. But I'll say if we had the card together, well, what if those parts were just 1 millimeter apart or 3 feet apart, right? We would have a different perception of that. If it was 1 millimeter apart, we'd say, okay, that's a loose car, but it's still a car, right? And our tendency to do that with deities or universe or people even, to oversimplify, to clump things, it helps us understand it, but then it becomes a limitation. And I think that's a limitation to the kind of view that you're saying, that it's not a question of a self-awareness, or a self-aware universe. It's more of the what I was referring to, at least, was that narrow, overly concrete version.
If I could just comment on the mechanistic, it's an identity. We place an identity on something when it's a unity, and when the parts are dispersed, we think it's not the same thing.
Right.
But we have to also take into consideration there are different kinds of wholes. Like a car is a mechanical whole.
Right.
So those parts, they exist before the car is made, they exist separate. Then an external agency comes and unifies them. So no doubt, it seems a little arbitrary to think of it as an identity when it's just a car, or when the parts are separated. But that's a mechanical. Organic wholes, like we see in biology, the parts aren't externally unified, right? The embryo, all the parts grow together, and it's an interdependent relation. So that person, when we're saying that's a whole person, we're ascribing some degree of confidence that yes, this is a bona fide self or an object, because it grew and came together. And if you took the head off and the arms apart and the legs apart, it's not a person anymore. They're dead, right? So it's
molecules.
Or molecules. But so the different kinds of wholes we have to take that into consideration when we're judging that kind of approach at objects. How did it come about? Is it a mechanical object? And then the whole is kind of arbitrary. But if it arose in an organic way, then there's more to say. Like, there's a reason to think it is a bona fide kind of unity.
It all comes back to Star Trek.
Star Trek.
You can't avoid it. It always comes back to Star Trek. The transport.
I'm ready. Beam me up, Scotty.
But your point's taken. I appreciate what you said.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. Yeah.
So we're actually coming at 4 o'clock. We have a half hour left. There's been so much talked about. If anyone has a question, even if it seems unrelated to some of the things that have been talked about, but you think that one of the professors might be able to give you an interesting perspective on it, or if you have a question about the discussion we're having, please feel free to speak up. This is an open environment, a safe space. Like, you're invited to open up your heart if you'd like to, and we're happy to.
Yeah, we don't grade you, so.
No grades.
No grades. Not even past fair.
Not on Friday.
So this whole panel has been really interesting, and it's always really interesting when you combine your different fields and come up with commonalities. But there is what I consider a bad offshoot of that, which is New Age stuff. Not bad. Well, I guess I would say that there's something I perceive as wrong with it. It's like taking the ingredients of a recipe that can produce something really good, but then also taking those same ingredients and producing something that somehow, instead of being greater than the sum of its parts, is actually less than the sum of its parts. So I guess I'm just curious, why you think that happens, and especially why it seems to be more of a recent thing. Like, as science advances, the need to turn science into religion also advances and comes up with something that just doesn't quite work on either side.
So what I'll take a swing at this real quick. What comes to my mind when you were saying that is, one of my friends just sent me this product that it's this card that you can infuse with positive quantum energy, and then you can wear on and you can get ones that fill with gratitude, and they fill with kindness and so on and so forth. And honestly, the whole thing just strikes me as it's snake oil.
Remember there was a study like 10 years ago where they did that with water? They projected positive vibes to water and they claimed that there was a difference in the water after.
Yeah, I mean, well, did anybody see the story that there was a cholera outbreak linked to holy water?
Oh,
Like, that just
I
happened a
know.
couple weeks ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there was a
There's a-
cholera outbreak
right.
linked to holy water. So I mean, it's this idea that so like taking, I'm gonna go back to my safe example of the quantum energy, because I know that one's utterly ridiculous. Part of it strikes me as, at least from the scientific perspective, as people latch onto a scientific idea that they think they understand, and quantum is particularly bad about this one because we don't have a good philosophical interpretation of it. And they think they understand an aspect of it, and then they think that it gives them free rein to do whatever they want with it.
Do you know the term quantum woo? Quantum woo, W-O-O. Woo is like a sort of pejorative term for new agey stuff.
Oh, I love that.
It's basically.
It's so good. Yeah, like I just saw a thing on this philosophical idea of quantum immortality. It's a play on the many worlds interpretation, and it's that at every single moment of always, there is a you in a different universe that has just died. And you are just, you're conscious and awake right now because the you right now is just the one that happened to live. Right? So I mean, there's science does allow itself to all these super like flim-flammy things, and I'm not really sure why that happens. Like, especially the ones that I feel like are the most atrocious are the ones that are like genuinely they're trying to like help people. And honestly, a lot of it just feels very cultish to me. People taking advantage. But yeah, I wish I had a better answer.
I think a couple of things, two things come to mind. It's number one is we're in a strange period of history now where, I mean, if you grew up in Europe in the Middle Ages, you probably knew one religion. Maybe you heard of Islam or Judaism or something, but we have this flood of information. Every possible spiritual system in the world, you can research it, you can find it on the internet, you can find a group of people who are practicing it somewhere. And so we have this like this mix of influences that is probably has never happened before, at least not in too many places or times in history. And the second thing I think is people want something that's going to help them predict and control how their life is going. And to me, that's kind of contrary to the kind of spirituality that that I've been talking about. But I think people naturally just want like, manifesting or the secret or those kinds of ideas where if I find out that one little secret idea, I'll be able to manipulate reality to so I can support myself financially, not even for evil means, just for, survival. But there's that wish to trying to control things that doesn't make sense, but people want to do it anyway.
And getting back to your recipe concept.
Yeah.
We can have the exact measurements of anything, but if we go to that Heraclitus, so I got in trouble when I was a little kid, shorter than I am now, and when I had hair, and we're learning all this stuff in grade school, and the social studies teacher brought up Heraclitus. I'll get to the recipe thing, and Heraclitus, you can never step into the same river twice. And then she asked the class, like, why? Okay, anybody with the IQ of a dart can figure the river is flowing. So technically, it's not the same river because it's constantly flowing. I got in trouble because I said, well, also because you're not the same person from one moment to the next that you step into this flowing river. Back to the class, back to the classroom trauma. You missed the point. Oh, I did.
I think that's what he was trying to say.
Oh, well, that's what I
think I heard Clayton was getting at.
With a recipe, especially for someone who in our office cooks for them every week, and I could put that teaspoon of whatever, that eighth of a teaspoon of whatever, at any given moment. It worked last week. Temperature in that convection oven may be different. I think it's an eighth of a teaspoon, but there's that grain of sage that happened to jump onto that teaspoon, and it totally shifts things. It's a nuanced thing, and it goes back to that awareness and the model and the testing again. And we keep, if we are not in the Middle Ages, which ironically were called Dark Ages, but I never thought about it. They're not really that dark if you read the literature of that time. You're like thinking really high stuff. Editorial. But it's that it grows and grows to go beyond what's next. And if we do think of that consciousness aspect thing, it's like Gumby. All right. You know, he can go into any book with his pony pal Pokey too. The idea is that those train tracks, that book, they were there because he willed them to be there. It's as if, okay, I'm going to be open to anything. And it was there. If the track had to go that way because his consciousness was there, and they're damn clay.
Yep.
They're malleable. That in itself was a metaphor for existence, right there. Anyway, so that's the recipe thing. I just wanted to address it.
I think one other aspect, just because this hit me while you guys were talking, is people underestimate the power of the placebo effect. If you think you have something that works, particularly in like the snake oil industry, if you think it works and you're really good at selling it, other people will think it worked too. The placebo effect is insanely strong. People don't realize how strong it actually is.
Yeah, that makes religion.
Yeah, yes, yes.
There is a Buddhist hell, you know that. Be careful.
Yeah, Buddhist hell is a representation of karma. So.
Just saying, just saying. Yeah, that's a good point about placebo effects, is that it kind of fits what I'm saying with meta awareness, is that we're living in a mind constructed experience of reality. I mean, appearing in whatever's appearing in awareness. So, you know, all bets are off when it comes to perceiving certain things, because it's how we put it together can make a complete difference in how things appear to us.
The fact that making pain meds blue make them work better.
Yeah.
Not even
colors,
joking.
yeah.
Just make them blue, they work better. Like that's the kind of stuff that its placebo effect is huge.
Yeah. It's remarkable.
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions? Comments?
During your statements, a little bit like paradigms of science, how they change, how they are, and then I think for some people paradigms like the free science part of it. Where does consciousness fall into that right now in the sciences?
I have no idea. It might be neuroscience realm. No.
I'm not off the top of my head. I'm not familiar with what about Kuhn?
Kuhn had this idea of scientific revolutions, that there's not just one, there's many, and they start as kind of more, I mean, I'm going to paraphrase the whole thing, but it's kind of like grassroots movements that then build up. I don't know where we're at in consciousness.
Sam Harris would say it's all like mechanics, but like a psychonautical scheme.
Yeah, or like, I mean, taking a recipe idea, like if you take all of the elements necessary to build a human, and then because we can do this, and use atomic tweezers to put the elements together in the right order, it'll take you hundreds of millions of years to do, but like build a human. When you're done, will they have a consciousness? Like, I don't know. I don't know if anybody has an answer to that. Yeah, like I know like quantum mechanics is often a mechanism that's invoked to try and explain consciousness. A really famous physicist by the name of Roger Penrose like has a quantum theory of consciousness that some people claim there's some experimental evidence that supports it. Some people think it's a bunch of hocus pocus. Yeah, I don't know. Like, yeah.
I would point, so we have this one piece of paper here that shows some university programs that exist here in the States, Europe. So like the University of Pittsburgh, they have a whole degree, I believe undergrad and graduate degree in philosophy and history of science. They deal with consciousness in there. Princeton University has a special in their philosophy master's program in the logic and the philosophy of science track. California Institute of Integral Studies has a whole department on ecology, spirituality, and religion. Over in Europe, the University of Wales has a MA, an online MA in ecology and spirituality. And the University of Edinburgh has a master's of science actually in philosophy, science, and religion. And all these programs deal with consciousness, but just to show if there's a paradigm shift going on, I think there is, because all these universities with endowments, lots of money, are deciding, hey, this is a good thing to do, right?
It's a good observation. Yeah.
What's that?
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that's like a
Well, I think because a lot of my perspective is with biology. There's been a lot of limitations to the models that science creates because they don't consider consciousness or cognition. They typically use the word cognition. And so when they do consider cognition, it changes their approach to things as important as cancer research, because instead of just trying to blast the tumor with radiation, they say, hey, these cells are cognitive, they communicate with each other, and a communication error has occurred. So let's try to figure out how they're talking to each other, figure out what this guy is saying. Basically, the cancer cell forgets that it's a multicellular component, thinks it's a unicellular entity, it starts doing things to mess up its neighbors. And that's what causes the tumor in some cases. So because they adopted a consciousness paradigm or cognition paradigm, now they're trying to talk to the cell and remind it that it's multicellular. It's affecting something like cancer research. So I think those are some of the reasons, plus a lot of people are disgruntled. I think that what they're learning in school is only preparing them for a career, which is important, but isn't giving them the tools to live a fulfilled life, or to even understand what that entails. And fulfillment implies consciousness, right? So, I think there is a paradigm shift going on in that direction. And we're hoping that this kind of panel discussion at Stockton will start a bigger conversation here about this.
So do you think shifting to science grassroots? It seems like with all these different ideas or classes towards.
You're probably right. I'm not an expert in the paradigm shift science myself, but I think there's reason to believe that it's well past the baby, it's past its womb. Or maybe it's not. Maybe this thing is going to be so big that this is the womb. Who knows?
Well, I know, just to point it out, something that I think is really exciting, and we'll see where it goes within the next 15 years, is quantum computing. Will give us an entirely new way to examine consciousness. Because if consciousness is quantum in nature, then quantum computing is the exact tool we need to begin analyzing it at its own level. So that is another reason why it might be people start gaining interest, in the sense that a collective unconscious might be all being quantum computing's now a thing, and who knows, maybe something's driving that. Yeah.
AI too, right? So quantum computing and AI.
Yep.
Yeah, I was just going to say, between quantum computing and AI, it's going to force us to not just play around with, make the conscious we have to take that into account, but to define what do we mean by that, and how do we deal with it.
Yeah.
I just saw a survey online that said that a guy from ChatGPT, I think that the CEO, right? He said that a lot of computer processing power is being wasted because people are saying please and thank you to the AI, right? And when asked why people were doing that, 2/3 of them said something like, well, because that's just the way I communicate. I don't want to be, even if I'm talking to a machine, I don't want to sound I'm acting like a jerk for my own sake. 15% said if there's a computer uprising, they hope that they'll look through the records and the computers won't kill them.
Correct.
I mean, we're monkeys dealing with stuff that is, way beyond, and it's gonna force us to understand and to make decisions about these kinds of things, which we've never had to do before.
Well, in recent polls, the more as time goes on with the advent, I'm glad AI got brought up. I didn't want to be the guy to do it, but exactly. Is recent polls, like when AI first came out, like a couple of years ago, it was like editing emails, writing computer code, blah, blah, blah. Nowadays, if you look at the new numbers, it's companionship, conversation, relationship advice. Those are like the #1 reason people are using AI. Like they're treating it more and more and more like it's a human, and it's getting super interesting.
Or a god.
Or a god.
I mean, it's
one of the two.
You brought up the word snake oil.
Yeah.
There's a guy from Princeton, I forgot his name, but he has a book called AI Snake Oil.
Yep.
That exactly addresses, what AI can really help
Right.
humanity to do and what is just nonsensical, and taking up a lot of people's emotional energy and cognitive energy, unfortunately.
But I think nowadays when you talk about the AGI, right? Generative AI.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think they said that they might be self-conscious.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we are actually in a way we are actually God.
Yeah.
Creating new sentient being.
Mhm.
And just like as you'll see the Ghost in the Shell,
Mhm.
which is
Yes.
new, and there'll be new version of a new animation Ghost in the Shell.
Yep. Yep.
And when you think about the consciousness, like when you talk about the miscommunication between among cells cause the cancer, then that's what scientists found is actually that's the miscommunication based on electromagnetic pulse. It's not about the consciousness. And therefore, it's hard to say that that's actually conscious level. But still, from the Buddhist viewpoint, we can say that the all human beings' body, the all beings' body itself is like thousands and thousands of the consciousness together in one body. So in a sense, the one person doesn't have the one consciousness, but has 10 trillion the consciousness bundled together as though it's one consciousness, which is causally combined together. So in that sense, actually, the human being, not only human being, but all beings are just combined entity of all the consciousness and energy in that sense. And then as you said, what is the purpose of life? So I was triggered by the question of purpose. What is purpose of life? From Buddhist viewpoint, there isn't any. There is the purpose is empty. Then what is purpose of life? Then when you make it, there's purpose. Samsara itself, which means the secret existence. If you see the Sanskrit, it means wander. Just like you're drifting, the ocean of suffering. That's samsara. So unless you can say when you set up the purpose, as you said, there might be the philosophy of religion can help, but then how we say it's up to science.
No pressure.
Really, I think.
We still have 10 minutes in our session today. Any other thoughts anyone wanted to share?
Are you guys gonna be very good then, very it's been really fascinating, but I was just thinking if you would be interested in having a fingerprint.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so next semester, we hope that this discussion, this event will generate interest in this, and the more interest there is, then the more reason we have to have another program like this and to just continue the conversation. That's the most important part. We hope that this is not just an isolated event and that it's an ongoing conversation, just like any of the other fields that we're learning at school. It's an ongoing conversation. More development is occurring, different perspectives are being shared. And we're hoping that this is a jump off point to just continue that conversation as far and as often as we can. So if there are no other questions, then maybe we should just close 20 minutes early. I want to thank everyone for coming. This has been a great end to our semester. I hope you all feel the same way. I invite you to have a free sweet ball. We made them homemade. We have a bunch of them. And feel free to stay around to talk amongst each other or amongst anyone. I'll hang out for a while.
I also want to thank you for putting this together because it's rare that we can sit here and have a lot of conversation. We're so busy with
It's
handling
only
the day to day.
you
Do this.
on Zoom in a committee
Yeah,
about
yeah.
attributes or
This is a
whatever.
great opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. It's honestly, this is really cool.
We also want to thank you guys
Yeah.
for all coming together. This was awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
thank you.
super
Yeah,
cool.
we know each other, but you hadn't never come in this way.
Exactly, right? Yeah. See faces on Zoom.
Yeah, yeah.
Feel free to, talk. Whatever.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.